Where do you want me? There you go. Okay. Are we on? We're on. Thank you for doing this. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've had in the last 48 hours the announcement of a trade deal with US, Mexico, and Canada. We've had the largest single private sector investment in the history of our country. What have you done lately? It's been a big day. So I want to start, let's start with the LNG story for just a moment, because I think that I want to get into the trade deal for sure. But this has been just such an extraordinary couple of days here. You have been part of a group of folks who are rightfully basking in the extraordinary news that was celebrated this morning. What are some of your visceral reflections on this? I mean, you've watched this happen over a period of time. You were neck deep in the Trans Mountain challenges. You've been heavily involved, as you point out, with the US trade negotiations, and then today happens. What's going through your head?
Well, first of all, obviously, we, like a lot of people in this room and people in this province, are absolutely delighted with this conclusion. We've been working hard with LNG Canada and with the partners. But I think it's, at moments like this, important to recognize that this has been a team effort for a long time. So this is something that our government's worked very hard on. We've worked to make sure that we can have some infrastructure investments that are going to enable LNG Canada to make the kind of investments they want to make. But the BC government, Premier Horgan and his team, have been absolutely on this from day one. The previous government, Christy Clark and Mike de Jong, were critically important in dealing with this. And it goes back, as Premier Horgan mentioned this morning, to 1982, the discussions around this. So I guess what it tells us is that we all need to work together on things that can make a big and meaningful difference to our economy. And this is a textbook example of how that can work. I know also that there's lots of people in this room, in the business community, who've been strong proponents of this. And I think we need to recognize that that sort of advocacy makes a real difference in ensuring that governments take the right decisions, the decisions that can make a difference for investment and for jobs over the long term.
I thought actually John Horgan's comments this morning were very generous. I think that there are a few moments where you were called upon as an elected person to rise above the partisanship, and I think he showed that this morning, actually. I thought he was very generous in his remarks. There's a few folks in the room here today who were part of, there's 140 organizations, as you may recall, who were part of a coalition of organizations that was across Canada called Confidence in Canada. And we rallied together on fairly short notice in support of your government's efforts to find a successful conclusion and get through some of the difficult impasses around the Trans Mountain issue. The Confidence in Canada theme is about, of course, our reputation on the global stage. What happened this morning to that reputation? To what extent was it enhanced or changed, and what work lies ahead to further fortify the fact that Canada is a great place in which to invest and do business?
I mean, I don't think there could be a better demonstration of confidence in Canada than when 5 international organizations commit to $40 billion of expenditure over the long term. It doesn't get any better than that. So as a demonstration to other organizations thinking of making investment in Canada, it's extremely positive. I think that you started with the Trans Mountain expansion. I think what we're going to show is that we can get things done in this country, big, important projects, by doing things the right way. So we will take the decision of the court and acknowledge that we need to have the scope to look at the environmental issues in a way that gives people confidence. We believe we've actually done some things that absolutely deal with the issues, but we need to ensure that confidence is there. We need to acknowledge that doing things the right way is the only way to get it done in consulting with Indigenous peoples. So that meaningful engagement is going to show people that we can get things done just by taking the approach that engages people along the way and legitimately considers their ideas and our opportunities for improving. Today can only be considered a good day. I think the ability to demonstrate the next project will be another good day. And of course, having the trade agreements to enable us to be successful, you know, it doesn't get better than that. We are the only G7 country who has trade agreements with all the other G7 countries. You know, think about that for a minute. We're the country with the broadest range of trade agreements when you think about the Canada-Europe trade agreement, the CPTPP, the Asia-Pacific area, the United States and Mexico. We are in a very good position to have preferential ability to trade around the world. It's a very good place to be.
Yeah, I need to come back to that because I noticed that as well. I got a couple of questions on that. You mentioned the engagement, and of course the Indigenous engagement is absolutely crucial part of this exercise, and frankly one of the key reasons why the LNG Canada project was so successful. I loved the remarks of Crystal Smith, the chief of the Haisla, who went to the microphone this morning, and her opening line is, "History is unfolding in front of us." And I thought it was a very powerful statement, and she was extraordinarily articulate but clearly excited. When you look at the engagement and the collaborating that has been done with the Indigenous peoples, how would you characterize this project in light of your government's commitment to renewed relationships with the Indigenous people of this country?
Well, I think, again, we need to recognize that the work has been done by LNG Canada, the work has been done by the BC government. It's been done over a long period of time, very effectively. I think it demonstrates the need for continued engagement. I think it gives us a frame that we can use in other projects. So I would just say, job well done. Mm-hmm. And we intend on demonstrating the capacity to do that as well in the Trans Mountain example, making sure that we really do have meaningful engagement that gets us to the right way to do things that can have a big and positive impact on our economy.
I think there's definitely some textbook lessons there that other proponents in the years to come will be studying from the LNG Canada experience. So let's move to the exciting deal that has played out in the last 40 years, last several months, of course, with a very unpredictable dance partner, of course.
You think?
You can go where you want with that. Both the Prime Minister and Minister Freeland used the remark several times in the last number of weeks, and it's always difficult, because there's a great deal of public interest and media interest in what's happening behind closed doors, and you can't negotiate in public, and that's obvious. But they both use the phrase, "No deal is better than a bad deal." There were some movements on this one with respect to dairy, pharma, automobiles, although the thresholds there have never been historically met. To where are we on that spectrum? After all the smoke is cleared, and we're still trying to digest it a wee bit, but you've been a little closer to it. Where are we on that spectrum of the quality of this deal relative to where you'd like to be or where we've been?
I think for everyone in this room who's going to read the newspapers, it's important to focus, in the first instance, at the very high level. We've ensured continued stability in our trading relationship in the United States at a time where there's very clearly some trends around the world to consider whether we should continue to trade in a free and open way. So we've demonstrated the ability to work together with our closest geographic partners in a productive and positive way. So getting into the specifics, I think we said that we needed to ensure that there was a deal that made sense for Canada, because there were some things that would not have made sense for us to agree to. We need to, when we're dealing with these sort of trade agreements, ensure that we have a way to resolve disputes. The issue that's so familiar to people in this room around softwood lumber has been one that has been resolved over time because of this Chapter 19 clause that allows us to have a dispute resolution mechanism. That was critically important to us because we can't have a deal that doesn't allow us to address challenges going forward. We also recognize that the single biggest part of our trading relationship with the United States is in the automobile sector. We have $18 billion of trade there. We have 500,000 Canadians needing jobs in that sector. And so dealing with this Section 232 they were using in order to create a threat of tariffs in the automotive sector, it was critically important that we got an exemption from that. So doing that in a way that made sense was essential. We've got an agreement where, to the extent that the United States ever uses this Section 232, which we don't think should apply to Canada, we won't be impacted up to 2.6 million automobiles going back and forth between Canada and the United States. And of course, last year we produced 1.8 million that went to the United States. So you can see that that protection is actually quite significant. So, so we've dealt with those two very fundamental issues. And then we looked at some of the other issues that were important to both countries, and we came to agreements that we think made sense. We dealt with the demand around trying to ensure that our dairy market had more access in a way that was, we think, appropriate to the challenge. It's 3.59% opening of that market, which is just slightly more than we had with the comprehensive trade agreement with the TPP, which was 3.2%. So a small change, and we're going to compensate those people impacted in a way that's appropriate. So in the end, it's a deal that we think makes sense. It allows us to have a continuing, stable and positive situation. And looking at our overall economy, being in a positive situation right now and having that solidified gives a much greater level of optimism from those people that are going to make investments.
So you had a chance earlier to meet our friend Wally Opal, our former Attorney General, who's also a Chapter 19 judge. So I want to go back.
We saved Wally's job as part of the.
Oh yeah, because he needs the dough. Yeah. But I'll shamelessly grab that thread that you threw out there in the dispute resolution process. So you have a room full of business people, and like most of the rest of Canada, a lot of small business people. And in BC, notably so, 6 out of 10 jobs come from the small business sector in this province.
Can I get an opportunity to remind people that we're lowering the small business tax rate?
You just did.
Okay, just in case you didn't ask me that, we are lowering the small business tax rate. It's going down again on January 1st, in case I can repeat that again. I'll say it one more time before I leave.
The single largest capital investment.
Yeah, that's right.
The dispute resolution process. Why does this matter so much when you're a small business in this country? I mean, intellectually I get it, but how does that translate down to the small business owner in this country? Why does the dispute resolution process matter so much, and why do we stick to our guns on this one issue as much as we clearly did?
We should start by saying that if we didn't have the dispute resolution mechanism, we would not be able to get duties back charged by the United States. So charging tariffs on our softwood lumber sector, as an example, has meant that we've claimed under that dispute resolution mechanism, we've won, and those tariffs have been paid back to Canada. So it's obviously important for that sector. That's an example. Other sectors could be subject to the same issue. So your question is, how does that impact a small business that might not be in those sectors? Well, we're all impacted if there's investor confidence. If businesses that are impacted by that have the ability to resolve things. Some businesses in this room may be suppliers to those firms if they're not actually directly impacted. Some of them may be businesses that get more business as a result of more investment. So having that assurance was, in our estimation, critically important. Gaining that agreement from the United States was, I will tell you, arduous. They had a different point of view than we did on that issue, and that's why negotiation is so important. And I would say that Minister Freeland, Chrystia Freeland, and the team did a very, very good job in getting us to conclusions that made sense.
So we mentioned off the top, and I was going to say tongue-in-cheek, but it wasn't really tongue-in-cheek. You had a very, very interesting dance partner on this particular negotiation. The U.S. government, the current administration in Washington, had 2 objectives before the midterm elections. One was to get a trade deal done, and the other is to get a farm bill passed. And the latter, of course, is a domestic issue, nothing really to do with us. However, that leaves the issue of softwood, speaking of dispute resolution, that leaves softwood and, of course, the outstanding issue of aluminum and steel tariffs. What's the way forward for those 3 critical issues?
I think it's important to know that we're not able to solve every single thing before the deadline. People in this room will understand the softwood lumber dispute is one that's been a recurring challenge. We are continuing to work on that front. The steel and aluminum tariffs, we are continuing to talk about that. Obviously, the U.S. is, as you mentioned, they're an election cycle. So that election cycle is grabbing their attention, and we certainly want to get back to that discussion. You heard if you listened to President Trump's news release or news conference yesterday, he talked about an openness to dealing with that issue, which is what we've heard, and we're going to keep working on that. I'm cautiously optimistic that we will get to a place that makes sense on that front. So, in a relationship as significant and varied as the Canada-U.S. trading relationship, there are going to be frictional, there'll be irritants. Our job is to keep working at them, and I think the positive relationship we've developed with the United States, and it has been positive. I mean, I know the media presents the the exciting moments that are dramatic, but there's a positive relationship back and forth between many of us in the administration, because that's our job. Our job is to represent people in the room to our trading partners and get to agreements that work. I think we'll be able to continue to do that with the next series of challenges.
So we've managed to get to those agreements that work, as you pointed out a few moments ago, with CETA, the CPTPP, and now the USMCA. So we're partners in all these, and I mean, it certainly suggests that we're an open trading nation, or at least we're very interested in managed trade, if not fully open trade. So those are our desires and aspirations. Where does that put us on the world stage in terms of what's next for us, in terms of trading relationships, and what does the batting lineup look like going forward now?
As we look to our next steps, there's a number of things we're working on. First of all, we've talked about the importance of trade diversification. We recognize that making investments in how people actually make best use of these trade agreements is critically important. So Ian Mackay is here, who's at Invest in Canada, and he knows better than almost anyone the importance of actually going back out to the places with businesses to help them to actually get engaged and think about how those trade agreements can work. We will be spending time and thinking about how we can ensure that trade diversification happens broadly. Specifically, we're going to be looking at places where we can improve our relationships. Myself and one of my colleagues, Jim Carr, will be going to Beijing in a few weeks, where we're continuing our economic and financial strategic dialogue with China. That's a long-term agenda. There's many sectors of the Chinese economy where we can improve our relationships, things like tourism and education, financial services that don't require a free trade deal. So our agenda will be to take note that we need to continue on this agenda, to recognize that especially in some sectors, we need more markets. In the oil and gas sector, the demonstration today around the LNG sector, we need to be thinking more than just in terms of Canada and the United States. We need to be thinking about the world and where we can have the most receptive markets for what we can produce and develop here in Canada.
So let me grab that thread, because you kind of threw it out there when you mentioned China. There's a really unusual provision in this deal around the notification and effectively a walkaway clause with respect to engaging in conversations on trade with what they refer to as non-market countries. And China's kind of the elephant in the room on that, of course. Can you put that in a little context for us? I mean, there's some rumblings around and criticism around this as an issue of sovereignty and things like that. But it's a bit deeper than that. I wanted to give you a chance to kind of chat that through a little bit.
So for those people who haven't focused on this, so there is obviously an important issue in the United States context where they are working to change the trading relationship with the United States and China. And they are trying to make sure that the openness to the Chinese economy to American investment is more reciprocal. That's an issue that's come up at the G7 table with Canada and with other countries, and it's an ongoing and important discussion. That led the United States to say that they wanted to make sure that as we have this agreement, that we weren't in any way creating a backdoor for other economies to come through Canada into the North American market. So it's a point of view that they have. It's a reasonable point of discussion, even if we don't fully agree on everything when these discussions come up. The conclusion we got to, though, is, I think, a very effective one. Remember that the United States currently had, before we got to the agreement yesterday or Sunday night, they had the ability to walk away from NAFTA on 6 months' notice at any time. So what we agreed to was that should any one of the three partners arrange a new deal with a non-market economy, then the other two partners have the right to walk away from the deal. So I would ask you how that's different than what we had before. It is largely the same. It recognizes, though, that the non-market economy issue is of significant importance as we move forward. But I don't think it's going to make a material difference in our activities. We're always going to have, as we have today, the U.S. as our largest trading partner. That will always create sensitivities about what other things we do around the world. That's just anybody in this room who has a business, if your largest client is TELUS and you're about to sign a deal with Bell Canada, you might think about that and make sure that they're okay with it. So that's just the reality of what we'll have to do going forward. And it isn't any different than it was last week.
I know we're speaking a bit in hypotheticals on this, but just I think the two examples that were given to me when I was trying to understand that a bit better were automobile parts or automobiles and steel. Effectively sending iron ore across the Pacific, it comes back, and steel back into Canada, and then effectively there's a concern, if I understand it right, that we'd be effectively flooding the U.S., could flood the market either through Mexico in the case of automobiles and Canada in the case of steel, getting into the U.S., effectively riding for free on our existing agreement. Is that an oversimplification, or is that about right?
Well, I think that's the concern. We wouldn't do that. So we've been pretty clear that there is not diversion or transshipment going on through Canada.
Right.
Through this discussion around the steel and aluminum tariffs, we've demonstrated that we're not doing that right now. So I think we need to continue to be good partners. That's just an expectation that when you have a trading agreement, you don't create a backdoor arrangement for someone else. We always have had that approach. This reinforces the importance of it.
Andrew Coyne made an interesting observation this morning. He referred to the deal the New Deal is strikingly, I believe the quote he used was strikingly similar to the TPP that the U.S. walked away from. What, if anything, does that tell you about the mentality of the Americans going into the next round of discussions vis-a-vis the Pacific?
I wouldn't be able to jump to any conclusions.
Oh, come on.
I think what this deal tells us is that we are important to the United States, and they are important to us. You know, we've been out talking to Americans and reminded them that 36 states have Canada as their largest trading partner. This has been very effective. I mean, it has as its core effectiveness the fact that it just happens to be true. So there are people across the United States that rely for their job on trading with Canada. 9
million of them. Yeah.
Exactly, and so that is critically important. It's not the same as the situation with the TPP countries with the United States.
Right.
I'm not saying that they're not important trading relationships as well, but it's a different calculus. So I'm not willing to guess.
No, what I was getting at is it looks like it could hopefully pave the way for more constructive conversations to America joining at some point a variation of the CPTPP.
Well, I would just say to the people in this room, that we would absolutely hope that. As an open trading nation, we want to see more open trade around the world. It's positive for the global economy. We do need to think about how the benefits of trade go to regular Canadians, because people need to support trade over the long run. I think what we're seeing around the world is that there are places where people are not as supportive of trade because the benefits of that trade are going disproportionately to some segments of society. So we have to look at the underlying cause of these issues. The Brexit decision was at least in part around that. The concerns around trading relationships in the United States are in part around that. So our goal as a government will be to continue to make sure that as we successfully grow the economy, that we provide the opportunity for Canadians to see success from that. And that, of course, that's always the goal. We need to think about how we actually deliver on that.
So I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't bring up the Gateway. You've suffered my remarks on that more than once. But we now have, the Port of Vancouver, YVR. You've got not just a major economic driver in the province, but it's, as I like to say, the St. Lawrence Seaway of the 21st century. We're now up at about 250,000 people in BC that it employs, 10% of our jobs in the province, and about $27.5 billion in GDP. What are the implications for the Gateway with respect to the New Deal?
I think I don't need to tell anyone in this room how important this city is to economic success in Canada. The fact of the matter is that as we develop new resources that can be moved around the world, the port here is going to be critically important. As the access of trade between Canada and Asian countries increases, and we expect it will, that this port becomes more and more important to the overall economy. So that's not just people in Vancouver, it's not just people in BC, it's to all Canadians. So I think that we should expect that with that importance comes long-term investment. That would be the reasonable thing to think about in terms of the port in this city, and I think it's exciting. I think it's a recognition of the increasing importance of Vancouver and British Columbia to the North American economy, not just the Canadian economy.
So yeah, you won't have any, I don't think you'll get any argument from the folks in this room on that one. So I've only got you for a few more minutes. I do want to pivot just a little bit to a similar issue around trade, which is our internal trade, and a little bit on competitiveness to wrap things up. We have obviously this great success in getting the new deal in place. While that's been happening, we of course have been looking to strengthen ties within the country as well, and this is increasing as provinces to provinces, but even the major cities, and you know my colleagues across the country, this is now one of our big issues, is the interprovincial trade barriers that are inhibiting business from across the country. The line is it's easier to get, you know, California wine than Quebec ale in Vancouver, right? Is
there a big demand for Quebec ale?
I've had it. It's outstanding. If I had the choice, trust me, I'd get more of it. But what do you see? It may not be lessons learned, but what are the opportunities? Is there any low-hanging fruit that you see right now within Ottawa? I mean, we as the business community have got our list, but is there anything that you see in Ottawa now with respect to improving interprovincial trade, and is there a role for the federal government to facilitate the cross-country trade and deal with some of the barriers that are really kind of nonsensical?
My sense as I go around the country is it's not very hard to leap to the need for trade diversification or the need for better interprovincial trade when we see that we were having challenges with our largest trading partner. So I think that marshals people's efforts to how we can be more successful in that regard. Obviously, we're going to, in terms of trade diversification, we're actually going to put money behind getting that done. That's something that we did in our last budget. It's a continuing agenda item. In terms of interprovincial trade, I think Canadians are broadly frustrated with the fact that we have interprovincial barriers, and it's something that all of you who are leading business people will be important advocates for. We're going to be bringing this to, there's an upcoming meeting of the ministers, the provincial ministers with the federal minister responsible for this file. At the first ministers meeting, this will be an area of focus for Prime Minister Trudeau to talk about the need to break down interprovincial trade barriers. And we're going to try and choose one or two places where we can have the single biggest impact on that issue. It is a continuing frustration, and we're all being parochial with our interests by not recognizing we can actually increase our overall GDP by breaking down those barriers. It's a long game because, you know, there's a new government in Quebec today. We're going to need to develop the relationship with them. You know, there's a change in government in New Brunswick that we don't really know yet what's going to happen there. So the changing players on the chessboard make it not the easiest of objectives, but it's one that I think we need to be relentless in going after.
Yeah, well, you'll certainly have our support for that. For the benefit of those in the audience, so when a truck leaves Victoria and drives to St. John's, Newfoundland, it's actually offside with the law 20 different times as it crosses the country.
Maybe different size tires, different length of
weight loads, axles.
It makes no sense at all, but so if you can help us.
Oh, trust me. We'll be following up. Now that's serious. I'm so pleased to hear that, because that is without question, it's consistently increasing in the ranks of the feedback we get from our members. That red tape and regulation piece of it, it's not get out of our way kind of stuff. It's the imposition of these unusual, and I suggest in the famous category of seemed like a good idea at the time kind of decisions that were made. So by all means, you know, Godspeed on that one, and we'll be glad to assist on that if we can. Let's briefly, where did my last one go here? Tax reform.
You wanted to talk about tax, I know.
I did. See, I couldn't let you off the stage and not talk about tax. So we're obviously observing what's happening south of the border, and the game has changed there. The tax reforms there under the Trump administration is obviously significant. We're of the view that both the private sector and the government needs to step up around competitiveness. So this is not a cap in hand kind of question around what's the government going to do for us. But the government obviously does play a role. So in the context of this new trade deal, is there anything there that you see in terms of government, if you will, paving the way and getting out of the way, which is the kind of free enterprise request of government, that will help and help us on the competitive file. So kind of bridge, if you will, the tax reform that's happening in the U.S., the trade deal that we've just established with the U.S. and Mexico, and is there anything from there that we can glean in terms of increasing our competitiveness?
Well, I think there's two things that have gone on in the United States that business people talk to me about. One is regulatory reform, and the other is tax reform. And so we recognize, first of all, that we need to get at some regulatory barriers that exist in our country. We talked about in our last budget the need to start focusing on this. We actually put some money behind looking at some sectors that we can deal with regulatory reform. The pharmaceutical sector was one example where we just see that the approvals take too long and are too arduous. On taxes, we, the United States made a number of changes. They changed their rate from 38% or 35% down to
34 to 18 or something.
21%. But that sort of hides the state and federal rate. So their rate now is a 25.8%. Their blended rate, state, federal, and our blended rate, federal, provincial, is 26.8%. So we're largely competitive. The U.S. was the last, really among the very last of the OECD countries to lower their rates to a competitive zone. So when I've gone out to businesses, I've not heard that issue, the rate issue, as the biggest issue. The issue I've heard from people is much more about the opportunity for Americans now in investments to have accelerated depreciation, so they can expense more of the investment cost in year one than they were previously able to, which creates a difference in terms of the Canadian ability to expense investments in the US. So we are looking very carefully at this issue. We want to make sure that over the long term we have the ability for Canadian businesses to invest on a competitive basis. This is absolutely essential. It doesn't impact all sectors, for sure. Obviously sectors that are mobile, the manufacturing sector will have a bigger impact than the forestry sector because they'll have different investment opportunities. So we're looking at the sectoral issues as well as the broader, how do you make investments in the two countries? This is what I've been working on for the last year, really, or not quite a year since they made those changes. And we're going to be talking about this in our fall economic statement. I want, business people in this room to know that to the extent you're considering investments, we want to make sure Canada is a place that's attractive for you to make investments and create jobs, and that is the objective behind what we're trying to achieve.
No, we'll look forward to that update, and thank you for the opportunity to give input to it. It's not taken for granted. So I'm going to give you the chance for some last thoughts here. It's just so you'll have the last word. I'm giving you the heads up. So in thanking you for being here today, this has been an extraordinary 3 or 4 days in our country's economic history. And I don't recall a time when you've had that convergence of these kind of things happening all at the same time. So you're an awfully busy guy. Thank you so much for coming to see us and for spending the time with us today that you did. I'll leave the last comments to you. Anything I didn't ask you wanted to touch on, or you have the final word to our guests in the audience?
Well, I didn't know I'd have that. That's nice. I've got a 20-minute speech prepared.
We only have the room till 1.
There you go. No, it's a real honor to be here, and I think that one of the things I always remark upon when I get the opportunity to come to BC, but also specifically Vancouver, is how fantastically well the city's doing. But I recognize with that there are challenges. So we are obviously working, as I said, on some things that will make it important opportunity for people to make business investment. But we're also thinking about how we deal with the challenge around skills and training. So one of the things that we recognize is that for people in this room or for other people in your organizations, there's a higher sense of anxiety about long-term work opportunities, and we're going to be making sure that that's one of the things we address over the course of the coming year, thinking about how we can help people to be effective in the roles that they have today and have the opportunity to be effective tomorrow in a fast-paced and changing environment. So the first step is creating the investment environment so people can make investments, and then it's making sure that we have the highly effective workforce that we need to actually have long-term success. I think in BC in particular, that issue around economic success is creating low unemployment, which is positive, but also creates challenges for jobs. So we see our next iteration as being part of the solution around that. And all of you are going to be critically important in that as well. So we're looking forward to working together. And the final thing I'd say is if you have ideas or specific issues, we would welcome hearing about them, because the opportunity I've had over the last 6 months to go across the country to hear from businesses about issues and challenges has been instrumental in helping us get to policy responses, which you're going to see over the course of the next few months. So thank you very much, and I hope to hear from you.
Minister Bill Morneau, ladies and gentlemen.